couple of minutes. The British Prime Minister David Cameron has said that after the cabinet meeting, which is due to be held at 10 o'clock GMT, he will announce the date of the EU referendums. That date will be announced after the cabinet meeting. We are, of course, expecting a date sometime in the month of June, so in around about 4 months' time. But we will get a definite date after he meets with his fellow cabinet members in Downing Street at 10 o'clock GMT. Of course, we'll have the latest on that for you here on BBC World News. But let's talk a little bit further about this deal. Nina Schick is Communications Director at the Open Europe. It's a think tank focused on the European Union. Nina, you've been watching this very closely. What are the most significant aspects of this reform?
Well, I think the question on economic governance, which is essentially deciding what the relationship will be between those countries that are in the Eurozone and those that aren't, is a very significant one, because this raises structural reform of the EU. I mean, Cameron has got recognised in the deal that Britain can keep the pound and that they won't be discriminated against the Eurozone countries in the single market. So this, going forward, I think is the most significant part of the deal in terms of structural reform of the EU.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are some countries who've had issues with various points, haven't they, within these reforms?
Yes, I mean, the Central and Eastern European countries have been very opposed to the benefits curbs, and even though this has gone through in some kind of compromised way, they're still not happy about it because they feel that their citizens should not be discriminated against. And of course, France was very hesitant to give Britain what it was asking for on the Eurozone safeguards issue, because it felt that Britain might get a veto, and it didn't want the City of London to get any kind of special treatment. And Belgium, for example, was very opposed to Britain opting out of ever closer union, which is something that Cameron got in the deal in the end.
I mean, this has been called legally binding by Donald Tusk. Is it really legally binding? Because it still has to go through the European Parliament, doesn't it?
The deal in its entirety does not have to go through the European Parliament. Parts of it have to go through, notably on the migrants issue, the benefits curbs, but everything else is an international agreement. So if there is a Remain vote on the day, that's when the agreement becomes binding. As I said, some legislation will have to go through the European Parliament afterwards.
These reforms, this special status that David Cameron has called it for the UK, how worrying is it for the European Union now in terms of other countries and what they may end up wanting?
Well, I think that raises the whole reform process raises a fundamental question about the EU's existential crisis right now. And I think that other EU countries are also certainly not comfortable with the way that the EU is operating. So I think it does kick off a process of asking, where is the EU going to go in future? And I think that this is a discussion that the EU cannot avoid. It needs to have this discussion.
And it's probably why they've kept it very UK focused, haven't they, this whole reform deal?
Indeed. The deal, as the deal has developed, it's become much more UK exceptional, which shows that other EU leaders are willing to discuss EU-wide reform. But I think that this is something that will certainly come back.
Okay, Nina, it's so good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.